Andrew from Sachs. Does your personality have anything to do with how smart you are? In other words, if we know how smart you are there certain aspects of your personality that we may be able to anticipate, given that we do know how smart you are? Well, the answer is that this is a question that's been raised many times in science across the world. Some 2 or 3 years ago, Jeremy Anglim, our research partner from Deakin University, and myself had a conversation about the fact that at Sachs we have very large databases of people's cognitive ability and their personality results, all of which have been derived in what's called a high-stakes environment. High stakes being when people filled these questionnaires in, they had something to aim for, which was a job. They were applying for jobs as part of the process. They got psych tested. So we conducted the research. We did the statistical analysis, and Jeremy found the results very interesting, and partnering with other academics from across various institutions, he then began to develop this into what's called a meta-analysis. Now, a meta-analysis is where you take a data set and you capture data from previous studies and you add all of that data together, and it forms a very large sample, and so we have some results. Now, the good news of all of this is that it's been published in Psych Bulletin. Psych Bulletin is around about as prestigious a publication as you can get in our line of work, so we're delighted with that. But we're here to talk about the results. Firstly, you see the reference at the bottom for the publication. Now, just to explain the diagram, this is based on 23 studies and it adds up to over 23,000 people. 23,000 is a very big data set. That's what we call big science. And so this is one of the largest data sets ever assembled for a similar study in the world, which I guess is one of the reasons why it got published in Psych Bulletin. Now, this infographic shows you the relationship between intelligence and a range of personality characteristics. These personality characteristics are what are called hexaco personality characteristics. The hexaco model of personality is the model of personality that Sachs and Deakin uses mainly in our research into personality. It's otherwise known as the 6-factor model of personality, and it came originally from Kibiam Lee and Mike Ashton in Canada. If you look at the lines here, some of the lines are red, which means that they are positive relationships, and some of the lines are black, which means they're negative relationships. Let's look at the strongest relationships first. And what we see here is that intelligence is linked to a personality characteristic called openness, otherwise known as openness to experience. And what that means is that smarter people tend to be more broad-minded and welcoming of new ideas. It means that people like new stuff. They're more kind of intellectually questing, if you want to put it that way. They like to find out things about the world. They're curious. We see the strongest relationships are with unconventionality and inquisitiveness. Unconventionality is the degree to which I am comfortable with ideas I haven't heard before, so things that sound a little bit unusual. And inquisitiveness is, well, I'm curious. It also relates to creativity, so people who are smarter tend to be more creative. In terms of extroversion, you see this is interesting because there's one positive relationship, and that's a relationship between social self-esteem and intelligence. Social self-esteem is the degree to which a person feels comfortable in their own skin. They think most people like them, and they feel that people are likely to see something valuable in them. So being smart makes them more likely to do that. In addition, though, sociability is negatively related to intelligence, which means that really smart people may be slightly more inclined to spend time by themselves or not to welcome social interaction in that kind of party or large group sense. You'll see that there's a negative relationship with liveliness. Liveliness is the degree to which somebody is chirpy, cheerful, and optimistic. And what that means is that really smart people may be a little more inclined to be pessimistic, gloomy. Maybe they can see negative outcomes more. Emotionality. People who are highly smart are much less likely to be emotionally unstable. They're much less likely to be anxious, they're much less likely to be fearful, they're much less likely to be sentimental or dependent, which means that they're more resilient. That's an interesting finding. People who are really smart are more likely to be emotionally self-reliant and able to cope with difficult circumstances. Then we move on to honesty, humility, which is to say that there's a positive relationship between honesty, humility, and greed avoidance. Honesty, humility is the characteristic of being honest and truthful, but in this particular case, it's saying that people who are highly smart are less likely to be greedy and more likely, therefore, to be generous. Then we move on to agreeableness. People who are highly intelligent are less likely to be impatient, which means that they are less likely to be angry. Patience in this context means slow to anger. Now that's interesting because for many years, hereditary psychologists have said that cognitive ability is a kind of a protector against negative behaviours like, for instance, violence. And so this is evidence for that, because what we see is that people who are smarter tend to be less angry than people who are not so smart. But there is a negative relationship with flexibility, and flexibility is the degree to which somebody's prepared to do stuff the way other people suggest that they do it. So a highly flexible person is somebody who'd say, yeah, okay, well, I'll give it a try the way you were suggesting. A really smart person may be a little bit more inclined to trust their own instincts about something rather than to simply accept another person's view. They may be a little bit more skeptical, therefore, and harder to convince. And finally, talking about conscientiousness. Now, conscientiousness is a very important personality characteristic. People who are highly conscientious tend to do their jobs better. It means that they're sort of planned, organised, hardworking, committed, thoughtful, and kind of not impulsive in the way that they do things. And what we see is the relationship between cognitive ability and conscientiousness is a mixed one, which is to say that there are positive relationships between cognitive ability and prudence, which means I think things through before I do them, and also diligence, which is to say people who are really smart are slightly more likely to be hardworking and committed. Finally, though, there is a negative relationship between organisation and intelligence, which suggests that people who are really smart may be kind of freer spirits in the way that they go about their work. They may not seek to have a really buttoned down plan about let's do this in this sequence. So there we have it. We have some strong results which show that there are relationships between cognitive ability and personality. Nuanced, interesting results, but it kind of suggests that if you're lucky enough to have cognitive ability high, then you may well, at the same time, get some benefits from a personality point of view. Now, given that both cognitive ability and personality are quite strongly genetically determined, it would be interesting to try and tease out the kind of nature-nurture component here. But what we see is that good tends to go with good in terms of both cognitive ability and personality. So here's a contribution to science. We hope that this is of help to you.